an opportunity to share a brief memory through our usual way, much like our studies in our congregations, where we'll be able to raise our hand and get called on and make a brief comment. And that will be after the talk at a certain time, so that will become clear to everybody if you stay on a little. And it looks like we're at 5 minutes after, so the brother who's in charge, I believe it's Michael who's hosting. Michael, I think it's time to begin. We'll get latecomers in as well, but that has definitely slowed down. So it's my pleasure then now to welcome everybody to this memorial for Joe Kempler. And I saw so many faces and so much family history there. It's just wonderful that you're supporting the family in this way. So thank you for that. In behalf of the family, we're going to introduce now our speaker. And this is an elder from a local congregation. And I want to introduce to you Brother Rick West. Brother West. Do we have Brother West?
Yeah, there you go.
Hi, Brother West. Thank you, Brother West.
That's good. That's good because you didn't hear my voice quiver because I was starting to quiver.
Well, it's easier to hear the talk if we can hear you. So thank you, yes, brother. Thank you for your work. And we'll give our attention to you now. Thank you.
It's a privilege to be able to be here to discuss a brother, a friend, a father, a grandfather, great-grandfather, a man like Joe Kempler. Many times when someone passes away or they fall asleep in death, sometimes you have to look for positive adjectives to use at a memorial talk. That's not the case here. Joe was an amazing, amazing man. And we're going to spend a little time talking about him, but the family would certainly like to thank you for your support. As Chuck said, it's a real tribute to Joe and a tribute to you as well. So we appreciate that. I'd like to begin by sharing a scripture with you that Joe really would like us all to hear, because it's the words of the Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And really, this is why we're here. In verse 13, it says, "Moreover, brothers, we do not want you to be ignorant about those who are sleeping in death, so that you may not sorrow as the rest do who have no hope." So we want to spend the morning or this afternoon a little bit making sure that we're not sorrowing like people do who have no hope. And the hope that Joe had was an amazing hope. And I have the privilege of be able to share with you what he thought and how he felt about his future even after he died. Let's first of all begin by reviewing a little bit about Joe himself. And most of us we all have some history with Joe or the family, or perhaps Susan, the boys. We all have some type of a history with them. But I personally learned so much by being in this position, because I was able to talk to the family and talk to different ones. And wow, what an interesting man Joe Kempler was. Joe is survived by his wife, Virginia, or Jenny, as some may know her. They were married 57 years. His daughter, he's survived by his daughter, Susan, her husband, Jeff, his sons, David, and his wife, Anita, Paul, and his wife, April, and his grandchildren, Kelly, Andrew, and his wife, Laura, Brian, as well as his new great-grandson, Noah. Joe was born in 1928 in Krakow, Poland. He grew up as just an ordinary young Jewish boy, as you'll see here in this picture. He had the same hopes and dreams of any young man of his generation. As a young boy, we've learned that Joe could read well before his years that he would start school. It's even said that he had a photographic memory. His mind was absolutely amazing. He loved trains. He loved reading books, and generally he was just a normal little boy in Poland. We all knew what happened to Joe in his early years, in his teen years, in the German concentration camps. Now, these years certainly shaped his future, but they did not define who Joe was. I can say that because I got to know Joe many years later. All of us did, as a matter of fact, got to know after that. But at my reflection and my thoughts of Joe are kind of summed up in this picture here. In the congregation, my grandchildren have two papas. They had Papa Joe, Papa Jackson. Now, both these kind men were loving and tender, and my grandchildren would love to go and talk to Joe, and they were drawn to him as well as Papa Jackson. This is a picture of myself and my daughter and Papa Joe. That's how I knew him. I didn't know him as a Holocaust survivor. He was just a kind, compassionate man who loved God, and he loved his brothers and his family. And as been documented and even commented on Joe by himself, he had a difficult time expressing love because of his past. But Joe worked on that, and he was certainly able to overcome many of the issues that he had. And we will forever be grateful to his daughter-in-law, April, for the work that she put into his memoir, The Altered I. It's a book that, to be honest with you, when it came out, I love Papa Joe so much that I didn't want to read it because I was afraid it was going to be dark. And so I didn't read it. I didn't until just recently. And oh, what a mistake I had made, because Joe was able to express things in that book, and April was able to convey them into words. His true experiences there. And it's a great historical book, one that we will forever be grateful that we have, because it really, really documented his life, as well as the video documentary of Knocking. Most of us maybe have seen that video documentary. If you haven't, it's available either, we were able to look it up either on Netflix or Hulu or one of those. So it's certainly there. Now, Joe, after he got out of the concentration camps, he came to, when the war ended, he was able to immigrate to the United States in November 1947. And from 1948 to 1953, he served in the National Guard. And that's really where he got his start in radio communications. In 1953, he married his first wife, Marion, as you see here. And Marion had health problems, but in 1955, she gave birth to a little girl, Susan, or some of us get to call her Susie. And there she is with her adopted mother, Joe's sister. Now, Marion had many health issues and eventually passed away, leaving Joe in an almost impossible situation. He was single, alone. He knew he couldn't properly care for his infant daughter. And so he had Susie adopted by his sister, and they became Susie's parents. Still, he stayed in touch with her, but struggled with the emotional difficulties of his past. Now, I want to encourage you to stay on after the end of the conclusion of the talk and the prayer and the song, to stay on, because there are going to be a series of interviews, and Susie's is one of those. And she can do a much better job than I can to express her feelings about her father and the beautiful relationship that they had together. Now, while serving in the National Guard, as I mentioned, he got involved in radio communications, and that led to his eventual career in development of such things as the cassette tape, the CD, the reel-to-reel, anything that had to do with putting sound onto tape, even onto vinyl. His son David said that he was known as the world's foremost audio magnetician. I don't know what that is, but I took David's word for it that it was pretty impressive. He was one that knew how to take sound and put it onto tape, and he was a brilliant, brilliant man. It said that he had a complete control of the English language, and those of us that knew him, obviously, except for his, I believe it's called his Yiddish accent a little bit, he spoke beautifully. It was said that he never had a crossword puzzle that he couldn't complete. And I think that's would be a challenge for many of us, but Joe never had that. In 1958, he was baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Then fast forward to 1963, Joe met and married Virginia. And they started their life off together there on the East Coast. And 2 years later, in 1965, David was born. And here we see David with Joe as a little boy. And then 2 years later, not to be left out, was little Paulie. He came along in 1960. Paul. He came along in 1967, and there he is with Joe. Now, the family moved from Southern California, moved to Southern California in 1974. They relocated, and that was because the company that Joe worked for, which was Capitol Records, asked him to move because that's where their main office was. And he was an integral part in their research and development department. And I encourage you to stay on at the end. There's a wonderful interview by a gentleman named Gordon Stafford, who actually worked with Joe back in the 70s and 80s, I believe. A very interesting interview explaining what Joe did and how he was so instrumental in developing these things that we take for granted now. Joe and Virginia took time during the summertime to take their boys to Yosemite for vacation pretty much every year. The boys look forward to that. They look back fondly on the time that they spent with Joe. He loved traveling. For those of us that can remember, we see him on cruises in different parts of the world. He and Virginia, either through his work or just because he loved to travel. Here's a picture of Joe and Virginia next to some, I forget what it's called, some kind of a Gila monster. He's a lot closer than I would have been to this thing. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but anyway, this is on one of their cruises. He loved doing that. He took all other kinds of vacations. He was just a good man. And in the next picture, you'll see that they obviously knew how to have a good time when they were on their cruises and their excursions. I saw that picture and I thought, man, we got to have that one up there. They certainly had a good life together. But there's a question that just needs to be answered. How could a man who went through this Holocaust, these horrible times where he came to believe that God didn't exist, and he, even if he did exist, he hated him, how did he ever become one of Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, I'd like to have, we've taped an interview with April, who has kind of become Joe's voice in later years. And she wrote the book. So I'd like to have her explain to us how Joe became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. April?
Hello, my name is April Kempler, and very often when Joe Kempler and I would do speaking engagements, I would say I was his voice. So today I'm going to be his voice one more time to express to you why someone like Joseph Kempler, who was a self-professed God-hater, would become someone who loved God and would become a worshiper of Jehovah. And this was something that was over many occurrences in his life. It was a sequence of events. And the first was in the camp of Melk, where he was surrounded for the first time among many different people of many different nationalities. He saw a barrack set apart with its own barbed wire. This created a lot of questions for him because he thought, well, in Melk, we're all criminals. These must be especially bad criminals. So what did they do to be in this barrack with their own barbed wire? And he asked one of the old timers who explained it to him that these were called bugle worship. They worship their God Jehovah. Well, this struck a chord with Joseph because he knew that this was the name of God, Jehovah. But he thought, why would Aryans be using the name Jehovah and be in a camp? So it created a lot of questions. Nobody really knew what they believed, but they were trusted. He noticed a lot of things about them, that they had positions and privileges that weren't given to other people. They could leave the camp unassisted, without a guard, and enter. They were trusted. He always felt they wore a purple triangle, and when he saw a purple triangle on the uniform, or the prison uniform, he could trust that person. They didn't shuffle like the other prisoners. They had their head out erect, and they looked pleasant, and he felt very safe in their presence. So this was the first time. Although he did not ever talk to anybody because there was fear of punishment, severe punishment for talking to them. This is why they were in their own barrack with their own barbed wire. The Nazis couldn't handle them preaching and giving hope to anybody, so they kept them separate. Another occasion happened much later after the war. Joseph was asked to be part of a pre-trial in Dachau. So he went there to give testimony, and he was surrounded by many people that he felt very unsafe around. He called them rabble or riffraff. They were loud, they were drinking, they were cursing, they were yelling. But there were two men there who he felt, they were very quiet, they were dignified. He felt drawn to them instantly. And he found out that these two were Jehovah's Witnesses who had been persecuted in the camps. In fact, one was severely crippled. He was held on a pole and he lost the use of his hand. But the brothers in that camp fed him and nurtured him and saved his life. Joseph found out this story and it drew him to him. He wanted to be near them. So when the time came for the testimony to be given, they brought out the prisoner, and the Jehovah's Witness man said, "This is the man who did this to me." And Joseph, "Stand up, tell them." He said, "No, vengeance belongs to Jehovah." Well, Joseph was perplexed. He couldn't believe that he wouldn't speak up for himself and have justice done. He felt very differently for himself. But that also stayed in his mind for many years. But they would talk to him every day that he was there, and they would tell him about paradise and a much more pleasant future. But he was young, a teenager, and he didn't want to hear about it. But he wanted to be polite, and on the last day, they gave him a book called Creation. And he realized later that this was a very special gift because it was their personal copy. But he didn't want to rely on religion as a crutch. He was above that. So although he liked them, was drawn to them, enjoyed their company, felt safe with them, he didn't want to join their religion. So now we flash forward many more years. Joseph is in America. He's married. His wife has just had a baby. He's going through some very difficult personal trials. And there's a knock at the door. He opens it. There's two people there. He finds out that they are Jehovah's Witnesses. He invites them in. He wants to talk to them. He has many questions. He realized that while they were in the camps, they could sign a document letting them go free. No one had this kind of a privilege given to them. There was a lot of red tape. He thought, well, all they had to do was renounce their religion, renounce Jehovah, and they could go free that very day. This was unheard of. He couldn't believe it. What gave these people this kind of courage and strength to stay in the camp? He wanted to know, because he thought, who cares what you believe? Sign it, get out, go, be alive, and then believe what you want to believe. They can't stop you. But he found out the reasons why they wouldn't sign. It was actually proving a point that they could be loyal to Jehovah no matter what. So he had many questions. He had started a Bible study. And one day, the lady that did study with him, her name is Minnie. She was from the South. It was a terrible, terrible rainy day, thunder, everything. She came to his door and he thought, wow, this woman felt I was so important. She risked the storm to come out with this message to teach me. There must be something to this. This is very important. So he started attending meetings and he learned more. It was never about the emotional aspect. It was never, he could never understand love. Love was something that was a concept that he had no idea of what that was. So it was an intellectual decision. It was based on connecting the dots of his past religion with what he knew of the Bible. It all made sense, and he was able to dedicate his life to Jehovah.
Thank you, April. That really gives the story of how Joe became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And he took his religion and his view of life very seriously. In fact, because of his experience in during the Holocaust, Jehovah's Witnesses are typically known for knocking on people's doors Saturday morning. For those of you that aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, you can really relate to this. You wake up out of a stupor and you go, what is going on here? That's typically what they're known for. But Joe, actually, he did that, of course, as well. But he went far beyond that, in that because of his experience in life, he was able to be used to go to different speaking venues all around the world when people wanted to hear from Holocaust survivors. And Joe's story was so different than others. Here he's shown in Tokyo, Japan, at one of these events. He was he went all over the world talking to people about his experience in the camps, but his story was quite different from others. Not only did he do it in big venues like to universities, professors, he did it in the classroom. Many times the students would be spellbound hearing his story. And it wasn't just a story, his was different. Many of the people who spoke at these venues spoke from their trials and their problems, and he certainly expressed those, but he took it to another level. He was able to try to give those people and share with them his hope that he had for the future. And really, that's really what we'd like to talk about. That's why he could be such a positive influence on so many people's lives, is what that hope that he had. And let's take just a few minutes, and I'd like to share with you from the Bible why Joe felt the way he did, and why, as Jehovah's Witnesses, death, yes, we know it's an enemy. It's terrible. It hurts us all. But our view is quite different from many people. And the reason is, let's go back and we'll use Joe as an example. When many started talking to him about the Bible and about what the future was, she took him back to the book of Genesis. And in Genesis, the first chapter, actually Genesis chapter 1 and verse 28, this is the beginning of man's life. After God had created man and put him here on the earth, notice what God's future, what he intended for man. He said, further, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and become many. Fill the earth and subdue it, and have in subjection the fish of the sea and the flying creatures of the heavens. So God's original purpose for man was they were to live on the earth, and they were to live an indefinite, forever, it says. They were to fill the earth. Well, we know what happened. We know the story. This disgruntled angel in the heavens decided that he would like to have worship. He would like to have man worship him. And so he came down and he told Eve a lie. And he said, Eve, is it true that God said, if you eat of this one tree, you will die? And really, that was the only restriction they had on them. And that was a test of loyalty for them. Once they passed that test, it would be over. But they had this test. They couldn't eat of that tree. And she said, yes, it's true. God said I would die. We would die if we ate of that. And Satan, this angel who became Satan, the devil, gave the very first lie. And that lie has been perpetuated for centuries now. He said, Eve, you do not need God in your life. You positively will not die. You will live forever, and you don't need God. And Eve was deceived, and she took that fruit. And of course, we know what's happened. That imperfection that Adam and Eve had, and that death sentence that God gave them, has been carried on to every single human from that moment on. But it's so interesting that throughout the scriptures, there are promises that are given, that God has given, prophecies about a time when the earth won't be like it is today. When that sin that Adam and Eve gave us, when that sin was started, that it would be done away with. And there's a few scriptures that I'd like to share with you about that future that Joe learned about. And no doubt he was confused. He had heard about this future from those two men in at the, I don't believe it was at that trial. They had told him about a future paradise. Now, he probably didn't know what they were talking about. But the Bible in Psalms 37 talks about a time, and this was a prophecy, of course, given many years ago, but it was pointing to the future. And it's interesting, this scripture in Psalms 37 talks about a time when, well, I'll just read it to you. It says, just a little while longer, and the wicked will be no more. You will look at where they were, and they will not be there. Now, that seemed like a dream, a time when there would be no wickedness on the earth. And yet, this is the promise that God gives. In verse 29, it says, the righteous will possess the earth, and they will live forever on it. Now, that appealed to Joe. Sure, everyone would like to live forever, but he was also faced with the fact that death was imminent. He saw death at a scale that you and I will never see in our human lifetimes as we know it now. He experienced it. And yet the man Job, who was undergoing a trial very similar in the sense that he was having many pains and problems, and what he said to God was absolutely profound. And it's something that really gives us hope when we think about Joe, when we think about any of our loved ones or other ones who have passed asleep and fallen asleep in death. In Job chapter 14. And this man, Job, was undergoing a lot of trials. He was under a lot of pressure. He got to the point that he wanted to die. And what he said in Job chapter 14, verse 14 is profound. Because he asked this question, if a man dies, can he live again? I will wait all the days of my compulsory service until my relief comes. And then he makes this very beautiful expression. He says, you will call and I will answer you. You will long for the work of your hands. So he recognized that even if he fell asleep in death, that his life was safe in the hands of his creator. Now, he did not understand, nor did Joe when he read this the first time, how that was all going to take place. He couldn't hardly believe that there would be a time when, as the book of Isaiah says, that no resident would say, I am sick. It sounds like a miracle. It sounds like a dream. The book of Ecclesiastes says something about that each one of us can relate to, in that we were created, when we think back to Adam and Eve, we were created with that desire to be on the earth. And when it comes to death, Joe didn't want that. We didn't want that for Joe. We don't want that for anyone. We certainly don't want it for ourselves. But the reason that it's so ingrained in us is found here in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And notice what verse 11 says. It says, he, talking about our creator, he made everything beautiful in its time. He has even put eternity in their hearts. So we were created with the desire to live forever. He put eternity into our hearts, which is why death is so hard for us. It's something that we were never created to experience. It might be likened to a computer program If you clicked on a certain, gave a computer a command, and you said, I want you to go here, but that program wasn't designed to go there, it would go into what's called a fatal spin, and it would spin and spin and spin, and it would spin until the battery ran out, because there was no place for that to go. Well, that's exactly the way death is for humans. We weren't created to experience, and we didn't have created in us that emotional place to go for death. That's why there's no rules when it comes to how we should react or how we should feel when someone dies. We weren't created to die. So if someone has to wail, that's okay. If they have to cry, that's okay. If they don't show any emotion at all, it's inside of them, that's okay. There's no rules to how we react when one of our loved ones dies. But knowing that the Bible promises something better really gives us a hope. And I'd like to share a scripture with you in John. And this isn't what happened to Jesus when he was on the earth. We learn a great deal about this in John chapter 11. And when we look at verses 11 through 14, we see that what happened here was one of Jesus' friends got sick, and he was several days away, and this man's sisters called for Jesus and said, come, we want you to come. And so Jesus was on his way to go see his friend Lazarus, and he got word in verse 11, he got word that this friend had died. So Jesus said something to his disciples. He said these things, he added, Lazarus, our friend, has fallen asleep, but I am traveling there to awaken him. The disciples then said to him, Lord, if he's sleeping, he will get well. Jesus, however, had spoken about his death, but they imagined he was speaking about taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus has died. And if we go on and read the rest of this account, we see that Jesus moaned within himself. He cried. He cried out loud because he saw the pain that death caused on his friends. Now, Jesus did something that was profound in that he took Lazarus, who had been in the grave for 4 days, and he called to him and brought him out. He resurrected him. And what he showed is how he was going to use his power as God's son to resurrect all mankind. In fact, in John chapter 5, he made that very clear. And he had performed a resurrection. And he said this about, after he had performed the resurrection, he told his disciples, he said, the hour is coming when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who have paid attention will live. And in verse 28, he said, don't be amazed at this, for the hour is coming in which all those in the memorial tombs will hear his voice and come out. Now, that's an odd concept for many of us because we've been taught that when we die, our spirit goes and we live forever. But we know, and the Bible does speak about those who live on the earth who will go to heaven. That's a fact. But the Bible calls them a little flock. And the vast majority of us, we have to look forward to a different type of a resurrection, the resurrection that Lazarus had, back to life as a human. And you might think, how is that possible? How could Joe, he's sleeping in death, and Jesus likened it to sleeping. And if you're asleep, then you can be woken up, right? At night, we go to sleep, we don't know what happens all night. We wake up in the morning and we're good. Well, you wonder, how could that be? Well, think about the ability that our Creator has to take a life, and then when it's time and when it's the right situation and the earth is going to be made a paradise again, and he wants to bring everyone back that has died, is it a big deal for him to give them their life back? Think about what happens when you take your iPhone in and you go in and your iPhone's been dropped in the water and you've lost all the data. It doesn't work anymore. You take it into the Apple store, and in just a few minutes, they download every single picture, everything about anything you had on that phone, gigabytes of data, and it's all right there, just miraculously. Well, that's man doing something, but God can do that with our lives, and he can take care of all those who have fallen asleep in death. So we think about right now, our lives are tumultuous. We have so much going on in our lives. And yet, now is not the time to not think about our relationship with our Creator. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 1 and 2 talks about making a good name with God. That scripture says that the day of death is better than the day of birth. And why does it say that? Well, it says that because when you're born, you have no history with God. But when you die, if you've made a good name with him, then you are absolutely going to be guaranteed to be in God's memory. 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4 says that God is the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our distress. Well, right now we need comfort. We've lost someone that we love. But the Bible promises that there will be a time when he will be resurrected. And as a final scripture, we think about when Joe will be resurrected. What will he come back to? An earth like this? No. The Apostle John had a vision of a future time. It wasn't in his day. It was a future time. It's a time that we feel is very soon to come about. But when he gave the conditions that were going to be existing when Joe is resurrected, as well as all of our loved ones, this is the condition that he said was going to happen. John said, now remember, he's got a vision and he's seeing things in the future. He said, with that, I heard a loud voice from the throne say, look, the tent of God is with mankind, and he will reside with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them. And he will wipe out every tear from their eyes. Neither will mourning, nor outcry, nor pain be any more. The former things have passed away. So all of the tragedy that Joe felt in his life, all of the pain that we feel, it says there will be no more tears. Well, these won't be tears of pain and sorrow. We'll have tears, but there'll be tears of joy when we get to see our loved ones come back. And when we think about the resurrection, we like to think of Joe, young man, vibrant. But you know, when he went on his trip, when they did the video knocking, he went on his trip to Poland. And when he came back at the end of that video, there's a little clip of Joe just being so happy. And we'd like to share that video clip with you as a concluding part of this memorial talk, so you can see exactly how Joe's going to feel when he's resurrected. Let's watch this video clip. Virginia said that was one of the happiest looks that she had ever seen on his face. So I think that's a good way to conclude our memorial service here about Joe. We hope that through the scriptures you've been able to find some comfort in knowing that Joe is sleeping. He's not in pain. He's just in God's memory awaiting that resurrection that's been promised. So I'd like to turn the meeting back over to Brother Swavinen. Take.
Thank you very much, Brother West, for that heartfelt talk. Beautifully prepared. I know it's hard for you. It's a lot went into that. And also to April for that beautiful video, kind of a synopsis of Joe's spiritual life and other things. We know there's more we'll be seeing. So thank you both for your hard work on that. It's very encouraging for us. What we're going to do now is we have a song, a concluding song, and The song is a beautiful one. To me, I think it's one of the best arrangements and most beautiful songs. Enjoy the lyrics. It's called He Will Call. And I believe we have a choir that's singing it, but you can also sing along if you like. Then after the song, I'm going to conclude with a brief prayer. And then there'll be another little announcement of some other things that are coming up. So let's enjoy the song.